If you'd like to learn how to save player data when they leave your game, so we have 38 points, and then load that data again when they return to the game, keep watching and I'll show you exactly how to do it. Welcome to Roblox Snippets. In this video we're going to look at some simple data loading and saving. So the first thing we'll do is set up each player with some variables to represent the data that we want to save and load. So come over to the server script service and we'll add a script, and we will change the name of this to main script. And this is where we will set up each player with their own leader stats and data. So we'll type game.players.playerAdded, and then we want to connect, and we're going to pass in the player as an argument. We'll put a function here and pass in the player as an argument. Now we're keeping this fairly simple, so we're just going to deal with players and not characters in here, as we're just dealing with data, but we can do more with this a little bit later, and I'll explain when that's necessary, maybe towards the end of the video. But for now, let's just go ahead and create a leader stats board, okay, where we're going to display the player data. So instance.new, and the leader stats is a folder, right? And we're going to parent this to each player. And the only other thing we need to do here is to say leader stats.name, all right, equals leader stats. So what this does is creates a folder and gives it to each player. So parenting it here, this is a different way to parent when you create an instance. And in this particular case, now you could call this over here whatever you like player stats, or whatever you like, game data. However, this part in here needs to be exactly like this, leader stats, all lowercase. It's a special word that Roblox code makes use of to display on the screen. So that's the only important thing about this that you need to know. Alright, next we'll create some data. So we're just going to give the player some points. So local player points, and we'll say instance.new, and this will be a number value, and we will parent this to our new leader stats folder. So that value will go inside of the folder, and then player points.name, and this is going to be displayed on the screen. So we'll give it an easy to understand heading, so points, and then player points dot value, and we will set that to 0. Right, so when this is run, each player gets a folder, and then this goes inside of it, and I'll show you exactly how that works once we get it up and running. Right, so that sets it up here ready to go so that we can make use of it. Now we need a way for us to let the player get some points. So let's come into the workspace view up here, and we'll create a part, and I'd like you to just change its color to something that you like, and you can change its material if you like, but come down and we'll make it say 5 by 0.5 by 5, so it's like a tile, and then scroll down through its properties and click on anchored, and we'll duplicate this one. We'll come up and duplicate it, and click on the move tool and just drag it over here, and then we'll duplicate it again. So we've got 3 of them here like this. Alright, so once we've got these 3 parts in here in the workspace, we might just put them together inside a model. So click on the first part, and then hold down shift and click the last one, and then we're going to right click on these, and we'll put them in as a model. So group as a model, and we can call this our parts model. Now we could have just made a folder and put it in here as well, but this will work for us just as well. All right, and now we can move that entire model around if we wish, and we can also use it to create a variable in our code. Now, because we've got 3 parts, imagine if we had 100 parts in here. They're all going to do the same thing. They're all going to let us give points to our players. But we're going to do that in one script. So down in server script service again, I'd like you to click on it and then plus, and we'll add a new script. And we will call this we'll call the script tagged parts script. And we're going to tag some parts, and we're going to make this script apply that code to all of the parts in our model up here. Alright, so to do that, we need to make use of a special service in Roblox called the collection service. So create a variable for that, CS, short for collection service, equals game, get service, collection service. And then right below this, create a variable called tagged parts, and we'll get the collection service and add a colon, and we're going to say get tagged. Alright, so this is a special method, alright, like our function, that will look for all the tagged parts with the name that we give it. So if we hit enter here, and it's looking for a string. So now what we do is we add a tag to the parts over here for this to look for. Alright, so just leaving that there, come over to your parts model and expand it like this, and up the top in plugins, okay, you'll probably need to come into workspace view when you go into plugins to make these light up like this. Alright, you should have a tag window, generic one that is in Roblox. Alright, if you do not have that, then come over to manage plugins, alright, and you can come in and click on the plus to add in one in here. However, in Roblox you should have this tag window instance here. So go ahead and click on that when you find it, and you'll get this little window here. So what we want to do is add a new tag in here. So it says add new tag, so go ahead and click in that box, and in this case we'll just call this my parts. Now I've made this camel case, so capital M and a capital P, and it will have to be exactly the same. However, if I go ahead and hit enter, we now have a tag with this little light bulb and an empty checkbox. So what we want to do is come over to our parts model, click on the first part, and then with shift click on the last part, so we highlight all of them, and when they're all blue like this, come over and click in the checkbox. And when it goes checked like this, then you are good to go and you can close that window if you wish. However, since we're coming back to the script, just leave it like that, and now type this tag in here. Alright, so my parts, and just make sure that it is exactly the same, and then you can close this window. Alright, once we gather these parts, they're put into this table, and we're going to loop through that using a for loop. So we'll say for underscore, now underscore means for however many there are inside, comma, TP representing the individual part, in pairs, and then our tagged parts do. And that is our loop that we can now type what we would normally type for one script in here, and instead of creating a variable for this part, TP represents, for example, this might be local part equals script.parent. In this case we just use TP. Right? So we're going to create a debounce value for a start for each part, and this will help control our script as to how quickly that it runs. And right below this, we'll now type tp.touched. Okay, now you won't get any helper text here because this doesn't exist yet. It only runs when it's in the game, so you need to be careful when you type this so that it's accurate. So tp.touched connect, and then a set of brackets, and we're going to add a function and pass in the hit parameter. which will represent which part of a character is hitting one of these parts. Now inside of here we'll get the player, alright, so that we know which player it is we need to get their data for. So local player equals game dot players, and then a colon, get player from character, and we're going to type in here hit dot parent. I'll just get rid of this window now. So this will, when a part of a character in the workspace hits one of the parts, it will work out that which character that part is attached to, like its foot or its head, and then look in all the players and then find out which player it is over here. With that information we can now write some conditional statements. So if player and DB, then. So as long as DB is true, alright, and we do have a player, this code in here will run. And if that is the case, the first thing we'll do is set DB equal to false, and then towards the end of the script we'll say task.wait of say 1 second, and then we'll set DB back to true. So this effectively lets this code run every second a player runs on and touches it. So if you wanted to make it longer or shorter, you could say 3 seconds in here, or 0.1, whatever works for you in your project. So we're up to this stage, and now this is where we can get a hold of, if we look in our main script, alright, this folder here. Okay, now to help you understand a little bit more, if you've never done this before, I'm just going to run the game. You don't have to, you can watch or you can try to do this as well. Right, with the game running, I'll open up my Explorer and Properties windows here, and if I open up the players up here, you'll see that my character name appears here, and then if I expand my player, here is the leader stats folder that I talked about, and that is what this is here. Okay, it's representing this, and my player is in here, and if we expand this, we get points, and that's what's represented here. So this name goes up here, and if you look in the value down here, this goes here. Okay, so that's how that works, and we want to get a hold of this each time we want to change the value. So come back to our tagged part script here, and the first thing we'll do is create a variable called pstats, which equals player, and then we will wait for child, and the name, which is leader stats. Now we use this wait for child here for a folder because at the moment it has one item in it, but it might have hundreds of items, and if you try to make use of the folder before everything's loaded, then it can cause errors. So when you say wait for child, it actually waits for this folder to load up before it tries to do anything. Okay, so we do that to prevent errors. Once we have the folder, now we can get our points value inside. So we say local player points equals, and we are looking inside of that now, so player stats, and we can just say pstats.points, okay, or whatever it is that you put in here, but it must be exactly the same capitals, so POINTS must be exactly the same for it to work. Alright, now what we can do is actually change that value, so we can say ppoints.value plus equals 1. So that will get the value that's already here, add 1 to it, and continue. Okay. Now when this happens, we might just make these parts here disappear and reappear after a second or two. So let's now say TP. Remember that it is out of these here, TP will be one of these. Okay. TP.transparency will equal 1. That will make it disappear. And TP.canCollide equals false. So that will stop the player running into it. And once we have done that, since we've got this task.wait in here, you can take a copy of these two lines then and use Command or Control C, and just below this paste them in, and we'll change to their opposite. So transparency will be 0, which will make it fully visible, and can collide set back to true, which will let the player run into it. And that is enough now to give this a test and see if they are all working. So click on File and Save and play. Right, I'm all loaded in, so if I run over to the first one here, you'll see I get a point and then it disappeared. It's come back fairly quickly because I ran over it and it disappeared. Alright, and if I come over to the next one, same thing. So I can keep running over these, getting points and having them return. Alright, so if that's what's happening for you, then we can go ahead and stop and move on to the next part. Now that we have a way to score points with our tag part script, we can close that script up the top here. We don't need it, but leave your main script open just at the moment, and we'll come back to our workspace view, and I'll just open up Explorer and Properties. Okay, so to deal with our saving and loading, we are going to make use of a module script. So we're going to create our own module, which will you'll be able to use to handle your data saving and loading. If you've never used them before, don't worry too much. It's not super difficult to understand. Just follow along with the steps and you will get the hang of it. So with Server Script Service, click on it and click on the plus next to it, and you should see module script show up. Now, if you've never used one before and you don't see it in the search box, start typing in module, M-O-D, and it should pop up near the top, and you can go ahead and left click on it to add one in. Alright, change the name of our module script here to be data mod script, and you'll see that we have these two. It looks a bit different, not a hello world, so this is actually useful. We don't want to delete this like we would hello world, we want to just make a change to it. So this is the name of your module, and we're going to make it the same as our script up here. So highlight the word module at the top and change it to be data and then mod. Alright, so data with a capital M. You can make this name whatever you like, but this makes sense for our project, so data mod. Alright, and inside of here we're going to create some functions that will let us handle all of our saving and loading when it is triggered from other scripts. Alright, so if we come back and open up our main script, we need to access this data mod over here, because data mods will not run by themselves. They need to be required by another script. So in our main script over here, I'd like you to come over here, and at the very top outside of our game added, I'd like you to type in here local data mod equals, and then type the word require, the keyword, and then the file path to where our module is. So it'll be game.serverscriptservice.dataModScript. And that will give us access to our data mod up here when we require it. Alright, so come back to our data mod, and let's have a think about what happens when a player enters the game. Okay, we want to check, are they a new player or are they a returning player that will have some data? Alright, so we'll have a special function in here that will go through and check that for us. So inside of our module here, just drop down and we've got a special way to set up our functions. We start by typing the word function, keyword, and then we type the name of the module that we are in, so data mod, and then another dot, and now we can give our function a name. Alright, and this one will be called set up player data. And we'll add in a set of brackets, and we will pass in the player as we want to do this for each player. Alright, now the data that we want to save or load is coming from, if we look in our main script, inside of this folder here. So any values we have inside of here, then they're what we want to save and load. So for that reason, we will create a variable game stats, and we will get that folder as a table. So player.leaderstats, okay, get children. And what this will do is grab this folder and we've only got one in here at the moment, but it will grab all of anything that's inside the folder and return it here as a table of data inside of this variable. Right, so just below this now what we're going to do is we'll look at our data, but before we can do that we need to get access to the data store service. So at the very top of our module up here, we're going to create a variable called DSS. Alright, so this is short for data store service equals name and then a colon, get service, inverted commas, whoops, inside of there, data store service. And right below this, create a variable called player data equals, and we're going to look in the data store service and add a colon and type get data store and add a set of inverted commas, and now we need to create a name for your data store. Alright, so I'm going to call mine player data testing video. Alright, now you just need to make sure that this is original, so you could just call it banana or car if you like, but at the end of it, it's good to add a version number, so 0.0.1, let's say. Alright, and that's what I'm going to call mine. Now what happens here, if I just close these, is when this script is required over here, okay, by this runs and it goes to the data store and says get this data store here that we've said. Now the unique thing about this method is that if it doesn't find this, it creates one for us and then puts it into this variable here, which we can then use to load or save data. Okay, so these two are very important before we get started down here. So after we've got our table of stats here that we're going to work with, the next thing that we want to do is to actually check to see whether this variable we created up here has any data inside of it. So we'll create another variable here just simply called data, and it will be equal to player data, so we're looking inside of this data store we created, colon, and we're going to type in get async. Alright, so get async, and now get async means it's looking on the server, so this is a request to the Roblox server to say, I want you to look in this data store, get any data that's there and put it back in here. However, if it doesn't find any, then this will be nil. And the code, or how we're going to search, is going to be using the player user ID. So in here we type player.user ID. Okay, so that has to be just like that. Now, as I said, this data will it will have data or it will be nil. So now we can write a conditional statement here to handle both of those situations. So the first one will be if data, and we're going to use not equals to, so not equals. That little squiggly line there is shift, and you'll find it up next to the 1 on your keyboard, and it means not equal to nil. Then, now, so if data is not equal to nil, then we're going to put a comment here to let us know the player has data. Right, because there is some data in there. We'll drop down a line and we'll say else. Alright, now if data then is equal to nil in this else statement, that means that we have a new player and we need to set up the data store. Okay, so we're going to, this will deal with grabbing data that the player already has, and this will only run if we have a new player that doesn't have any data. Right, so hopefully that makes sense. And we'll drop a couple of print statements in here to let us know when things are happening or not. And so in here we'll say print and player has data. And down here we're going to say print and we'll say new player setting up data. All right, to let us know what's going on when our code runs. Now the other thing is this is a table. So if we have a table here, then we can look at that table as print data very simply by saying print in here data. And it will print out down in our output window here a version that we can look inside of and check to see what's going on. All right. So the first part that logically that we should set up is setting up a new player, because we don't have any players yet or any data. So that's what we're going to do down here now. So just below our print statement, if you drop down a couple of lines, and we'll just give ourselves a bit of space, we're going to reset data down here, okay, because we've already defined that data is equal to nil, but we're going to reset that data variable so that it's just an empty table. So data equals and a set of squiggly brackets. All right, so that represents an empty table. And below this, we are now going to loop through this, let's move back up here, this table of game stats, and we're going to add each of those stats into this table using a for loop. So just watch, follow along, and you'll see how this is done. So we're going to say for I, each stat in pairs, game stats, and just move outside and say do. Right, so it's going to loop through that table of stats, and for each one inside of it, it will have each stat in there, all right, which will be represented by, on the left side will be the name, points, and on the right side will be its value from the main script, all right, and we're going to put that into the data here. So data and a set of square brackets, right? Each stat dot name, so that will be points in our case, will equal each stat dot value. Okay. Now you could run this, however you're going to get errors just at the moment, so just hold off in case you want to test, and I'll explain why we'll get errors very shortly. We'll just finish this section first, and then we'll get set up to do some testing. All right. However, for each stat that is inside of this folder, this will add this into this table here. Now, right below that, so at the end of the for, hit enter a couple of times, and we're going to now set or save this data to our data store. And we do this by creating two variables, success, comma, data. Actually, we can say success or error we'll put in here. And we're going to use a special function called a pcall function. So what a pcall function is, if we type in function here, the two brackets move outside and it should look like this. A pcall function will run whatever code we put in here, and if there are errors inside of here, it, instead of breaking this entire script, it will just return whatever the error was here and continue to try and finish the rest of the script for us. So it's a sort of a protection method when you use a pcall. But put this in here, and we use this because this is a network call, meaning that we're relying on the internet to communicate with Roblox servers to get our data or save our data, and sometimes that fails. So now what we want to do is take this table of data here and save it into our data store. Okay, so this is our data store, and this is the data that we want to put down here. This is the data that we want to put into it. And we do that by saying player data and then a colon, and instead of get, we say set async. All right, and if you notice in the helper text, it's asking for what's the key. Now the key is the player user ID. Okay, so player.user ID, and then comma, what is it that you want to save? Well, we want to save this table of data. All right, now this line will run and it will return back here either success or an error message. So we just need below this, a conditional statement that will let us know which one it was. So we can say if success, so if it was true, then print, okay, data saved for new player, else, okay, and we're going to give them a warning. So type in warn. This is a special kind of print message. So new player data save failed. And if this was to run, it should come up in a yellow type of writing down the bottom. Okay, so come up and click on File and Save. Now at the moment, nothing will happen if you run this because we're not calling this anywhere. And what we want to happen is when each player, so if we come into our main script now, okay, when each player is loaded in, we now want to run that setup function. And we do that right at the end of where you would have all of your list of variables, etc. And we type in the name of the data mod up the top. Remember, we created this up here. So data mod, and then dot, and you'll see that our function name comes up. And we can simply hit enter. And what do we want to pass into this? Well, remember, we just want to pass in the player, which is coming into the game here. And now that will run. Okay, so let's click on File and Save, and let's run it and see what happens. All right, now if you didn't get errors down the bottom here, there's something wrong, and I did this on purpose. Okay, it says you must publish this place to the web to access the data store. All right, because we're working online. So I'll now show you how to do that up here. So with your current project as it is, come up to File, and instead of Save to File, we're going to come down and go to Publish to Roblox, and you'll have this window come up. So up the top here, give your project a name, and I'm going to say Practice, Save, and Load. Okay, that's what my project is. You can make this whatever you like. And down the bottom here, because we're not working with Team Create, you can go ahead and turn that off. It doesn't really matter. And click on Create down the bottom. Now just give it a second to finish doing what it's doing, and you should have this success screen that comes up here. All right. Once that's happened, click on Close. All right, and we have published now to Roblox. Now once you have done that, if you come up to Home now on the top tab and click on Game Settings, all right, now we have all of this information in here that we can add to. Now you can look through this at your own leisure, but the one that we are interested in is permissions. Sorry, no it's not, it's security. So click on security, and if you come down to the second one, enable studio access to API services. So click on this so it goes green, and if you read it, it says enable studio access to game services such as data stores. So that's the only one we need to change at this time. You can read through these and have a look at them a bit later, but for now just click on Save, and you should come back. Now over here we've got the little broom. Let's sweep this up so it's clean, and just to check, we'll go File, Save, and File, Publish. All right, and you'll get some messages down here that it's been published, etc. And now let's try to play again. All right, this time when you load in, you should see these two messages: new player, setting up data, and then data saved for new player. All right, if you're getting those two messages, everything is working just as it should, and we are ready to move on to the next part now, to enable us to actually capture some of this data and add it into save for our player. All right, that's what we'll work on next. Okay, now that we have our data store set up and we have set up data for a new player, Now we're going to look at how we save data for that player when they leave the game. So come back to our data mod, and just above where we have made the other function, so just drop down a couple of lines, we'll create a new function. So function data mod dot save data, and we will pass in the player when we do this. Alright, this is going to be triggered when our players leave the game, and we're going to do that from the main script. So come back to it, and down the bottom where we have our data setup player, right after this we're going to bind a function to each player that will be triggered when they leave the game, and that is what will make it run and save the data. We do that by typing game and then a colon, and we're going to type bind to close and a function and drop down a line, and then simply inside of here now we can say data mod dot save data and pass our player through, and that will save our player when they leave the game. Alright, that's triggering the function. Now let's come back to the mod script where we need to add our code. And if you think about this carefully, it's very similar to our setup data down the bottom. The first thing that we want to do is get a hold of our game stats folder here. So let's copy that, just that first line. So highlight it, Command C or Control C to copy, and then paste it into here. Okay, so we've got our stat. Now this part here we don't need to know about this doing this conditional statement. However, this part down here, so come down in your code and find where we created this empty data table here, and I'd like you to highlight and copy everything down to the end of the conditional statement at the bottom, and we'll go Control or Command C to copy it and come back up to our save data, and at the end just hit enter a couple of times and paste Control V. Now we've got one error at the top here because this variable doesn't exist, so we're going to make add local in front of this, so that local will make it only relevant inside of this function, and the rest of the code will run. So now what will happen is we will get our stats folder, and in the stats we're going to add that into the data. We are still going to set it to player data, only it will have data in it this time when they leave. And the last thing is we just want to change these messages down here because it's not a new player anymore. So data saved for, and we might just say player leaving, and below this it's not new player, so we might change this to say player game data failed to save. Alright, and that is our entire function there ready to be used. So I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see. So whenever we make changes to this, we need to come up and say file save to file, and we also need to go file publish to Roblox, and we can give this a test. Alright, now you'll notice that when I load in, player has data, and down here I've got points equals 0 because we have been in the game before and it's already set up my data store, so our code should be working properly now. Now if we come over and change this, however, alright, you'll notice that it's changed up here, but when we leave the game, alright, you'll see data saved, player leaving. Okay, let's see what happens when we play again now. Alright, up here in leader stats it's got points 0, and if we open up our points you'll see the data has actually saved, but now we need to load it back into the game so that it displays correctly. Alright, so we have the data coming back to us. Alright, it's in there, and now we need a new function in order to get that to work. So that's what should happen when you play test a couple of times. You should see player has data, and this should change each time you continue to go in. Alright, so let's stop that there. And we will now, and you'll see that it was saved down the bottom here. We'll now move on to how we load that data when the game loads up. Alright, so first thing, we'll just get rid of these messages, and we'll come into our data store, and up the very top, and I'll zoom back in here. Remember I said put a version number at the end of here? What I'd like you to do is change this now to be version 2. Alright, and what this will do is reset our data store so that we're dealing with a new player after we've finished this next bit of code. And you can click on File and Save and Publish there if you wish. And we're ready to move on to looking at loading our player data. So just above where we have created our save data function, let's drop down a couple of lines and we'll create a new function here by saying function data mod dot load data, load data, and add the player in. And we're also actually passing the data because we already have this, and that will make things much easier. Now this is very similar to saving, only where we're going to change things up a little bit. So take this first line where we're getting this variable here, so copy this and put it in here, and then drop down here and we'll write this one out. It's the same sort of for loop, so for I each stat in pairs our game stats above. Okay, move out do. And this time, instead of putting things into data, we're actually getting this data table and we're putting it into our game or our stats table up here. And we can do that by saying player dot leader stats. So we're accessing this directly, the folder leader stats, and then a square bracket each stat. So this is the one that we're cycling through, dot name, and move outside and put an equals dot value. So equals, and we'll finish this and then I'll explain it, data, okay, each stat, so a square bracket each stat dot name. Alright, just to make this clear, what we're doing is we're looking inside of the player's leader stats folder. We're finding whichever name's being cycled through, and remember we've only got one and it will be points. And then we're looking at the dot value part of it. So if we look in our main script over here, player points dot value, this here, this is what we're looking at. And from that, we're going to take the data that's being passed in, okay, which will be from down below when they leave the game. And we're simply finding each stat dot name, so data, and this will return the value. Okay, so in data, this is like the index name in a dictionary, so this is the key, and when you add the key in here, it gets the value directly after it, and that's what will be placed into here. Okay, so that's about as clear as I can explain it, but if you think through this clearly and even add some print statements in, you may be able to say, okay, now I get how that works. Alright, but now we need to actually call this function. So what you can do is take a copy of the name up the top here, so Command or Control C to copy it, and what we're going to do is come down to down the bottom here where we're loading up our setup data, and remember we have this in here, we're printing the data, so just after this paste that in here. Okay, so when this runs, it will load up the data immediately into leader stats, and that should appear on the screen, and that is all we need to do to get this to work. So come up and click on File and Save, and then File and Publish to Roblox, and let's play. And you'll notice, because we reset our data stores, new player, setting up data, data save for new player. Now we can run over and let's get some points. So we're running around playing the game. Alright, so just change your values a little bit. So I've got 9 points up here at the moment. Let's come up and leave the game. And you should see it says data saved, okay, player leaving. And then we want to play the game again. And you should see up in the leader stats, my 9 points have been returned up here. And we've also got our print down here showing that we've got this here. And this will work now over and over. So if I run over and continue to get points, alright, so get, let's say, what have I got there, 21 points, and I stop. Alright, data save to player leaving, and if I play, we get our 21 points back. Alright, so as you can see, it's a basic saving and loading scheme to save your data. It does have some limitations. However, this has been a good introduction, I think, for beginners to learn how saving and loading works on the Roblox service. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos. If you found this video useful, subscribe now. For more information about my online courses, go to mrbrendanross.com.